Have you ever felt like your own desires and needs just...
Well, they blur completely with someone else's.
hmm
Like, your main purpose in a relationship is maybe making sure they're happy, even if it leaves you feeling, I don't know, utterly drained, a little lost.
Yeah, that feeling of being almost fused, right?
Yeah.
Like your well-being depends entirely on theirs.
Exactly. And if that resonates with you listening, you are definitely not alone.
Not at all.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into a term that's, well, it's become incredibly popular. You hear it everywhere in self-help therapy circles, codependency.
Right. It gets thrown around a lot.
It really does. But what does it actually mean for you? How can you tell if maybe you're caught in one of these dynamics?
And crucially, what can you do about it? How can you build healthier, more balanced connections?
That's what we're going to get to.
That's the mission today, yeah.
Yeah.
Think of this deep dive as your shortcut to really understanding codependency.
Okay.
We're going to try and untangle its history, which is surprisingly complex.
We'll dismantle some of those common myths that kind of cloud the picture,
Okay.
pinpoint its roots, and then, importantly, lay out a clear path towards, healing and building connections that genuinely work for you.
Giving people those aha moments without getting bogged down.
Exactly. Distilling the key insights from our sources, aiming for clarity over just, information overload.
Perfect.
Mm.
So what's the roadmap?
Okay, so we'll start by defining this often slippery term. Then we trace its origins. Where did it come from?
Right.
Then we tackle those myths head on. After that, we'll look at how it actually shows up, the signs and symptoms.
Makes sense.
Then dig into the why, the roots, and finally arm you with some practical strategies for healing and, well, thriving.
Great. So let's start there. You mentioned it's not exactly a medical diagnosis you'd find in a textbook. So what is it then?
Exactly. It's key to understand it's more of a pattern of behavior. Our sources consistently describe it as a dysfunctional relationship dynamic.
Okay, dynamic.
Yeah, where one person becomes, excessively reliant on another.
For what kind of needs? Emotional, physical.
It has to be emotional, physical, or psychological needs. And here's the really crucial part. This often happens at the expense of both people's well-being.
So it hurts everyone involved.
Pretty much. It's characterized by this fundamental imbalance.
Imbalance of power. Control.
And control, yes. Where one person feels intensely responsible for the other's happiness,
Well, completely neglecting their own needs.
That's it. That's the core dynamic.
Now, I've also heard the term enmeshment used. Is that the same thing?
That's a great question. They're related but distinct. Enmeshment, as the APA describes it, is when people are so, intensely involved in each other's lives.
Too involved.
Yeah, so involved that it really limits individual autonomy. Personal boundaries get incredibly blurred.
Okay.
And that enmeshment, that lack of clear boundaries, can actually create the fertile ground for codependency to develop. It often leads into it.
Got it. So this sounds pretty serious. Why should someone listening right now really pay attention to this? Why does it matter?
It matters hugely.
Our sources are really clear on this. These patterns can lead straight into relationships that are deeply one-sided, even destructive. We're talking about a lot of frustration, resentment, chronic stress building up.
And beyond the relationship itself, the impact on your personal mental health is significant.
Right. Like what?
Things like burnout, actual declining physical health, depression, really low self-esteem, constantly struggling with boundaries.
Wow.
And sometimes even turning to things like substance use just to cope with the emotional toll.
So recognizing these patterns isn't just about putting a label on something.
Not at all.
It's really a critical first step toward building healthier relationships and honestly protecting your own emotional well-being.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating to look at where this term even came from. Its history is quite a journey.
Where does it start?
Well, it really started gaining traction back in the 1950s within Alcoholics Anonymous program.
Really?
Yeah. They initially used it to describe the partners, often the wives, of men struggling with alcoholism. The idea was that their choices, even well-intentioned ones, sometimes inadvertently enabled the addiction.
The enabler concept.
Exactly. And this led to the whole family disease idea within AA, the recognition that addiction impacts the entire family system.
Okay, so it started with addiction. but it didn't stay there.
No, by the 70s and 80s, the definition really broadened out significantly.
How so?
It expanded to include coping mechanisms people developed in response to all sorts of challenging childhoods, not just addiction, but maybe emotional instability in the family, trauma, chronic illness.
So coping mechanisms from childhood carrying over.
Precisely. And this is when the term just exploded in self-help books and popular psychology. Sometimes it got a bit oversimplified, leading to this idea of a codependent personality.
Which isn't quite right, as we discussed.
Right, and that led to a bit of a critical reassessment starting in the 90s and continuing today. There was criticism about potential stigmatization and the lack of clear diagnostic criteria.
So how do therapists view it now?
Nowadays, therapists tend to focus more on codependent behaviors or patterns rather than a fixed label or diagnosis.
That feels more helpful.
It is. The emphasis has really shifted towards understanding the underlying causes of these unhealthy patterns. And, most importantly, empowering people to develop healthy boundaries and strong self-care practices. It's a much more nuanced and, frankly, hopeful approach.
Given how much it's been discussed, especially in that self-help boom, how common actually is it? Are we talking niche or widespread?
It seems pretty widespread, although pinning down exact numbers is tricky.
Why is that?
Well, estimates really vary depending on the study and how they define or measure it. You see figures ranging anywhere from, say, 10% up to over 90% of the U.S. population.
Wow, 90%. That's a huge range.
It is. But what that range really tells us is that while the specifics are debated, these patterns of behavior are certainly not uncommon.
So chances are, many of us listening might recognize some of these tendencies in ourselves or our relationships at different times.
Absolutely. It exists on a spectrum, and many people likely exhibit some traits without it being a major issue, while for others it's more pervasive.
Okay, so since it did become so popular, a lot of myths and misconceptions popped up. Well, let's try and clear some of those up.
Good idea. A really big one is the myth that codependency only happens in relationships where there's addiction.
Right, because of its origins in AA.
Exactly. But that's just not true anymore. It can absolutely show up in any kind of relationship.
Romantic family.
Romantic family, friendships, even work relationships. Anywhere you have that dynamic where one person feels overly responsible for another's well-being, often at their own expense.
Okay. And what about the idea that it's just a personality trait, like being introverted or extroverted?
That's another critical misunderstanding. It is not a clinical diagnosis, and it's not some fixed part of who you are.
It's learned behavior.
It's a pattern of learned behaviors, usually developed as a response to challenging environments or unhealthy relationship dynamics.
And the really hopeful part there is,
Because it's learned, it can absolutely be unlearned and changed. You're not stuck with it.
that's empowering. What about comparing it to just being, clingy or needy? Is it the same thing?
Not quite. While being clingy or maybe seeming needy can be symptoms you see.
They're part of the picture sometimes.
Yes, but codependency is broader and deeper, really. It involves this unhealthy level of dependence where your actual identity and your self-worth get tangled up with the other person.
So it goes beyond just wanting closeness.
Right. It often includes excessive caretaking, enabling behaviors, and real difficulty setting or holding boundaries. That's much more complex than just clinginess.
And you mentioned the spectrum idea. People often think it's black and white. You either are codependent or you aren't.
Definitely not. It's absolutely a spectrum. The intensity varies hugely from person to person, relationship to relationship.
So you might see some behaviors.
Yeah, you might exhibit some behaviors without it causing major distress in your life, or on the other end, you could experience significant impairment in your relationships and just your overall day-to-day functioning. It's rarely all or nothing.
Got it. And there's a really harmful myth, too, isn't there, that people exhibiting these patterns are somehow weak or immature.
Ugh, yes. That's such an unfair and inaccurate stereotype. Codependency often develops as a pretty sophisticated, albeit unhealthy, coping mechanism.
The survival strategy, almost.
Exactly. Often for people who've experienced significant challenges like trauma, neglect, or really dysfunctional family dynamics growing up, it's a learned pattern. It's not a reflection of some personal flaw or weakness.
Okay, and the final myth, maybe the most important one to bust. The idea that codependency can't be overcome.
Absolutely false. Totally false. With self-awareness, getting the right support, maybe therapy, individuals absolutely can learn to recognize these behaviors.
And change them.
Yes, address them, and develop much healthier patterns. It transforms lives. It's definitely a journey, but it's a very achievable one.
That's crucial to hear. So if you're listening now, what might some of these patterns actually look like? How can you recognize them in yourself?
Well, it looks different for everyone, of course, but there are some common indicators you can reflect on. Ask yourself, do I tend to define myself mainly through my relationships?
Like, who am I without this person?
Exactly. Would it be hard to say who you are or what your purpose is if a key relationship ended? Another thing, do you often hold back your real feelings?
Why would someone do that?
Maybe fear that your emotions, anger, sadness, disagreement will negatively impact others? Or feeling guilty or selfish for even thinking about focusing on your own well-being?
Okay. What else?
Is your happiness really dependent on someone else being happy? Do you find yourself going to extremes to try and make them happy?
Even if it costs you?
Even if it costs you significantly, you might also recognize things like a deep-seated fear of abandonment, maybe a strong tendency towards people-pleasing, or just consistently struggling to set healthy boundaries.
Saying no feels impossible.
Yeah, or expressing disagreement feels really risky. These are all potential clues that some codependent patterns might be active.
Let's maybe delve a bit deeper into some specific patterns people might notice in how they interact with others.
Okay.
One powerful sign our sources mention is being consistently attracted to partners who seem needy or troubled.
Ah, the rescuer or savior complex.
Right. It feels like you're drawn to people who require excessive support, like you need to fix them. But what's often underneath that?
Often it can mask deeper insecurities in the rescuer, or it reflects those learned childhood roles where maybe you had to care for others to feel valued or safe.
Makes sense. What's another pattern?
Staying in unhealthy relationships long past the point where it's clear they aren't working or are even harmful.
Why would someone do that?
Often it's driven by a really profound fear of being alone or abandoned. That fear can feel so overwhelming that tolerating disrespect, neglect, or even abuse seems like the lesser evil.
Because being alone feels even more terrifying.
Precisely. And there's often this underlying belief, maybe unconscious, that you can fix the person or the relationship if you just try hard enough.
And a third major pattern.
Feeling overly responsible for other people's happiness, constantly taking on that caretaker role.
Like it's your job to manage their feelings.
Yes, assuming responsibility for their feelings, their problems, their choices. It's exhausting.
I bet. It leads to feeling totally overwhelmed and drained.
Absolutely depleted because you're pouring all your energy outwards with very little coming back in to replenish you.
It's so important then to remember what you said earlier. This isn't something innate.
Absolutely crucial. Codependency is not something you're born with. It's a set of behavior patterns that develop over time, usually in response to your environment.
And understanding where they come from.
That's genuinely the key to being able to change them. You have to understand the roots.
And our families, our early life experiences, they're incredibly powerful shapers in all this, aren't they?
Hugely powerful. Think about dysfunctional family patterns. Maybe instability, substance abuse, chronic conflict. These things can seriously disrupt the development of healthy emotional boundaries.
How so?
Well, in those kinds of environments, kids often have to adopt certain behaviors just to cope, just to survive emotionally.
Like what kind of behaviors?
For example, if expressing your own needs consistently led to rejection or criticism, you might learn very quickly to suppress your needs and focus entirely on meeting others' needs instead.
Becoming the good kid or the caretaker.
Exactly. Maybe becoming a caretaker earns you validation or just keeps the peace. And then that pattern gets carried right into adult relationships, seeking that same validation through excessive caretaking. Poor communication patterns in the family also play a big role.
Makes sense. And we also touched on how early attachment styles, those bonds with caregivers, really shape our adult relationships. Can you walk us through that connection again?
Certainly. So think of secure attachment as the ideal foundation. It comes from having caregivers who are generally responsive and reliable.
So you feel safe and valued.
Right. And people with secure attachment tend to develop healthier relationships later on. They usually have stronger boundaries, a better sense of self-worth, less prone to codependency.
Okay, but what about the other styles?
Well, anxious attachment often develops if caregiving was inconsistent, sometimes available, sometimes not.
Leaving you feeling insecure.
Exactly. Leading to a heightened need for reassurance in adult relationships, an intense fear of abandonment, maybe being overly accommodating just to keep the connection secure.
Okay, that sounds like fertile ground for codependency.
It really can be. Then there's avoidant attachment, which often stems from caregivers who are emotionally unavailable or dismissive.
So you learn not to rely on others emotionally.
You learn to suppress your needs for connection. This can lead to struggles with intimacy and trust, maybe keeping partners at an emotional distance.
And how do these styles interact?
What's really interesting is how often you see anxious and avoidant types drawn to each other. The anxious person seeks closeness, the avoidant person pulls away.
Creating that push-pull dynamic.
Exactly. That classic, often painful push-pull dance that can unfortunately reinforce unhealthy dependency patterns for both partners.
So when we talk about deeper wounds, how do things like actual trauma or emotional neglect in childhood feed into these patterns?
They create really deep emotional wounds. Experiences like abuse, neglect, or other significant painful events in childhood can make the world feel fundamentally unsafe or unpredictable.
So you develop ways to cope.
You develop coping mechanisms that prioritize feeling connected and validated almost at any cost because that feels like survival.
And that can look like.
It might look like excessive caretaking of others, trying to control situations, or developing an unhealthy reliance on partners for emotional regulation because you didn't learn how to manage those big feelings yourself.
And what about emotional neglect specifically?
Yeah.
Maybe less obvious than overt abuse.
Emotional neglect, that chronic unresponsiveness to a child's emotional needs, is incredibly impactful. If your feelings were consistently ignored or dismissed,
You learn to shut them down.
you learn to suppress your own emotions, maybe develop low self-worth because your inner world wasn't validated. And you might become hyper-attuned, overly sensitive to others' needs as a way to connect or feel safe.
Which looks a lot like adult codependency.
It's a direct pathway for many people. These early experiences then translate into specific learned behaviors that can become almost automatic in adulthood.
Can we break some of those down?
Sure, we see people-pleasing, constantly prioritizing others' needs over your own, always seeking approval, finding it incredibly hard to say no, maybe apologizing excessively.
Feeling responsible for others' feelings.
Yes. Then there's caretaking. Getting overly focused on fixing other people's problems, constantly being on that rescue mission, often to the point of total self-neglect and exhaustion.
What else?
A strong need for control often emerges, trying to manage other people's moods, manipulate situations, or dictate decisions, usually stemming from a deep fear of uncertainty or abandonment.
And boundaries.
Poor boundaries are a hallmark. Those internal fences around your well-being are weak or blurry, making it really hard to distinguish your own needs, feelings, and responsibilities from someone else's.
And expressing emotions.
Huge difficulty there often. A real fear that expressing strong emotions, especially things like anger, sadness, or disagreement, will lead to conflict, rejection, or the loss of the relationship. These are all deeply ingrained survival strategies learned early on.
So these are the ways we try to survive when things felt difficult or unsafe, right? They become our default coping mechanisms.
Exactly right. And our sources point to several common ways people try to manage the underlying distress these patterns cause. Things like denial.
Just pretending the problems aren't there.
Yeah, minimizing or ignoring significant issues in the relationship, or maybe turning to substance misuse or emotional eating, or even becoming a workaholic.
As ways to numb out or avoid facing things.
Precisely. Using external things to cope with internal pain. Some people might also isolate themselves, building walls to avoid vulnerability altogether. These mechanisms might offer some temporary relief, but they ultimately prevent genuine healing and growth.
Okay, so we've really unpacked the what and the why.
Yeah.
Now let's shift focus. Let's talk about the how, the path forward, moving towards healing and building genuinely healthy connections. Where does that start?
It really has to start from within. And the absolute foundation for any meaningful change here is developing self-awareness.
Why is that so fundamental?
Because codependency, by its very nature, blurs the lines between your needs and others. It makes it hard to even know what you're feeling or needing.
So self-awareness helps you see clearly.
It allows you to step back and actually see those patterns in action, how you might people-please or enable or over-identify with someone else's emotional state.
Recognizing your own triggers.
Recognizing your triggers, yes. And crucially, starting to identify your own unique needs, your own boundaries, your own authentic emotions. It connects you back to yourself. It's about learning to distinguish your feelings from theirs.
And part of that self-awareness, as you mentioned, often involves looking back at those childhood wounds. Experiences like abandonment Or maybe controlling parents?
Yes, our sources consistently link those experiences to codependent patterns. Facing those wounds, while definitely uncomfortable sometimes,
That's not easy work.
not at all, but understanding the why behind, say, your intense fear of abandonment or your deep need to control situations is incredibly powerful.
It helps make sense of the present.
Exactly. It fosters self-compassion. You're not trying to erase the past, but to understand and transform its ongoing impact on your present life and relationships.
So alongside that awareness, what else is vital for healing?
Self-care and self-compassion are absolutely essential pillars.
Let's define those quickly. Self-care first.
Self-care is about purposeful actions you take to preserve your well-being, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. It's about intentionally meeting your own needs, nurturing yourself.
Not just bubble baths, right?
Definitely not just bubble baths, although those can be nice. It's also about maybe rediscovering hobbies, engaging in joyful activities just for you, independent of needing external validation, reconnecting with what you enjoy.
Okay. And self-compassion.
Self-compassion, drawing from psychologist Kristen Neff's work, is essentially turning that kindness and understanding you might easily offer a friend inwards toward yourself.
Treating yourself like a friend.
Exactly. Especially when you're struggling or you feel like you've messed up. It actively counteracts that harsh inner critic, that perfectionism, that's often tied up with codependency. It helps you accept your imperfections and feel worthy of care, just as you are.
And tools like mindfulness and emotional regulation seem like they'd be incredibly helpful here too. How do they fit in?
They're powerful tools. Mindfulness helps you become aware of your thoughts and feelings in the moment without immediately judging them or getting swept away by them.
Creating some space.
Creating space, exactly. It helps you see the patterns and triggers more clearly as they happen. Emotional regulation skills then help you manage those feelings constructively rather than resorting to old, unhealthy coping mechanisms.
So you're not just reacting automatically.
Right. You create a gap between the stimulus, maybe a partner's mood, and your response. You get to choose a healthier reaction. It fosters self-acceptance, acknowledging feelings without self-blame, and ultimately builds resilience. You become better equipped to handle challenges.
We know low self-esteem is often linked with codependency. Needing that external approval becomes so important. How do we build genuine self-esteem and self-worth from the inside out?
Yeah, that link is strong. Again, self-compassion is huge, learning to talk to yourself with kindness, but also actively challenging those negative core beliefs you hold about yourself.
Questioning the inner critic.
Yes, asking, what's the actual evidence for this harsh thought? Often there isn't much solid evidence. And another really powerful way is connecting with your personal values.
What truly matters to you?
Exactly. Identifying your core principles, your passions, what gives your life meaning. When you start aligning your actions with your values, rather than just trying to please others, you build this authentic, internal sense of confidence and worth that isn't dependent on outside approval.
Like that idea from The Greater Good in Action, just reflecting on what truly inspires you can be a simple way to affirm those values.
Absolutely. It anchors you in what's genuinely important to you.
So as we move away from codependency, what are we moving towards? What does a healthy dynamic look like? Let's clarify the difference between codependency and healthy interdependence.
This distinction is absolutely critical. Codependency, remember, involves those unhealthy attachments, often a loss of your sense of self, really blurry boundaries, maybe constant anxiety about abandonment. It ends up feeling suffocating.
And healthy interdependence.
Healthy interdependence is totally different. It's characterized by mutual support, yes, but also individual growth. Both people rely on each other, but they also maintain their own separate interests, goals, friendships, sense of self.
So you're connected, but still individuals.
Precisely. It fosters mutual growth, strengthens the bond, because it's based on respect and autonomy, not fear or obligation. It really empowers both people within a secure connection.
Another area where the lines can blur is empathy versus enabling. How do we tell the difference?
That's a tough one sometimes, but the impact is vastly different. Empathy is about truly understanding and validating someone else's feelings, offering support, but without trying to fix their problems or taking responsibility for their choices.
So it respects their agency.
Exactly. It respects boundaries and trusts that the other person can navigate their own challenges, even if it's hard. Enabling, on the other hand, is when you shield someone from the natural consequences of their actions.
Protecting them in a way that hurts them long term.
Yes, often reinforcing negative behaviors. It's usually driven by your own fear of conflict, fear of their pain, fear of abandonment, or maybe a need for control. It ultimately disempowers the other person and hinders their growth.
So the key difference,
Empathy empowers. Enabling disempowers.
That's a great way to put it. And similarly, our sources distinguish between codependent caretaking and genuine caregiving.
Right. Codependent caretaking, as we've discussed, is often driven by those less healthy motivations, maybe needing to feel needed, seeking validation, trying to exert control, or even avoiding your own problems by focusing on theirs.
So it's about your needs disguised as helping them.
Often, yes, at least partially.
Okay.
True caregiving, however, comes from a place of genuine compassion and support for the other person's well-being, but without those underlying agendas, and crucially, without losing yourself completely in the process.
Okay, wow. We've really covered a lot of ground today. We've taken this deep dive into codependency, looking at its surprising origins, what it actually means.
Debunking some of those really persistent myths.
Yeah, understanding its roots in family dynamics, attachment styles, those early wounds.
And importantly, exploring that path towards healing.
Exactly. Through self-awareness, self-compassion, setting those healthy boundaries.
It's a lot, but hopefully clarifying.
Definitely.
And the key thing to remember, really, is that codependency is a learned pattern. It is not a life sentence.
That's the hopeful message.
It really is. The journey to recovery, it's all about reclaiming your autonomy, redefining your relationships on healthier terms, and nurturing your authentic self.
Moving from that feeling of suffocating dependence.
Towards empowering interdependence, where you can grow alongside the people you care about without losing yourself along the way.
So now that you've learned so much about this intricate dance of codependency, here's a final thought for you to maybe ponder this week. What one small, independent step can you commit to taking? Something just for you. Maybe it's honoring one of your own needs, exploring a passion you've let slide, or simply carving out a moment of quiet self-care, even if it feels a little uncomfortable or unfamiliar first.
That first step can be the hardest.
It can. But sometimes that smallest step towards yourself, prioritizing you just a little bit, is actually the biggest leap you can take towards building healthier, more authentic relationships.